Okay, so I'll call the meeting to order. And I do expect Steve Morgan to be here soon. Everybody else is present. What I discovered when I was doing the summary of the last meeting was that I ended everything a little bit too quickly, and I left off the stuff in pretty much Article 7 about nominations and elections. So I thought we'd finish that up first, and then maybe go back and start hitting some of the areas that we haven't made decisions on. So in 7.02B, the language in there allows nominating petitions to be signed in pencil. And I brought that to Kathy's attention, and she about had a heart attack and said that we should get rid of that and make sure that people sign in pen so it can't be meddled with. So I think that's a pretty simple change.
Yeah, agree.
She also wanted to change the deadline for filing nominating petitions. Right now it's 4:30. And City Hall these days for a number of years is closed at 4 o'clock. So I thought it might be simple just to change it to the deadline for filing nominating petitions would be the normal close of business at the city clerk's office on this whatever day it is before the election. So that allows some flexibility there if hours change.
Okay.
Age to be elected, we have talked about that before, and the consensus kind of was, without a whole lot of enthusiasm, to go to 18 from 20. Is that still where people are?
That's
Patty's
not
going,
where I'm
"No."
at.
That's where I am.
No, I think that maturity is very important in between 18 and 21. I mean, or 18 and 16, I guess you're thinking of going back to?
18,
18. To run for office.
yes.
Okay. Yeah,
So-
I don't know. I just think that maturity is crucial between 18 and 21. There's a lot of growing during that time. And I don't know. I'm not for that.
I know Jennifer had some
Yeah,
concerns too.
I'm not wholeheartedly for it.
Linda,
And I would concur that I think that, there is some maturity issues at that age. My kids are just getting out of that age actually, and actually getting, into the high 20s and almost 30 now. So, but I would have to say that, voting age is 18, and somebody that can make the decision to make a vote and is actively involved in their community, and maybe one has been a youth advisor on either the school committee or the city council, I would not be adverse to having somebody of that age that wants to run for council or run for a position and be eligible for it. So I guess that if we're split on that, we probably should be something that we would send for the council as part of our, a decision.
yeah, I think that's certainly what we do, is just indicate that the committee was split on changing the age. But as I kind of read it, it's Patty's got concerns, Jennifer's not sold on it.
Yeah.
Linda, I think is, Roger is.
I'll chime in because I haven't said anything about it. I'll basically concur with Linda. If the federal voting is 18, we should inspire our youth to not only vote, but to be inspired to run for election. It's up to the voters to elect whoever they decide. If they think 18 is too young, or the person's not mature enough, or isn't knowledgeable enough, that's up to us to decide as voters. There's a lot of other folks that are much more, let's say, mature above 18 that I would not consider as being mentally mature enough for a position. So
No
let's
names,
put
please,
it
no
at
names.
that. So let's just present it to the council and be it as that, but I would be in favor of keeping it at, moving it to 18.
Steve, welcome.
Hi, thanks. Sorry.
You
The
have
drinking age is
any
21. I
feel-
want to put that out there too. Sorry.
Excuse me, Patty?
I was
Okay.
just saying the drinking age is 21 also. So we're talking about the voting age is 18, drinking age is 21.
Right.
So anyway.
Steve, you have
And
a
now
feeling?
Well, I don't think I'd probably vote for an 18, 19, 20-year-old probably, but I see a couple of people that are in their 20s that are young kids that are bright young kids and they bring a different viewpoint, maybe a more educated viewpoint than I've got being an old guy. So I still go back to the same thing, that if you can get drafted, if they ever put the draft back and they make it 18, they shouldn't. They should make it 25, but they don't. They make it 18. And I think if you're going to be able to serve your country in that respect, then you should be able to vote too.
I would just, I mean, I've chimed in before, so I'll be brief, but I like what Francis just said. And I would add that I don't think it's likely that very many 18 or 19 or even 20-year-olds would run for the council, and that any of those who would are very likely to be extraordinary young people and probably really ready to take on that responsibility. When I taught high school students, it was my pleasure to teach honors seniors for several years, and I can recall many of my honor senior students who would at that time have clearly been ready to serve on a city council or even a state legislature.
Yeah, I'm aware of two folks that I know who were elected very young. One was 18, and that was Pat, who was eventually a city manager in Auburn. Pat, do you remember her last name?
Oh yes, I know who you mean, but I can't remember her name.
Yeah, it skips my mind too. But she was elected at 18 to the city council in Bangor, and then of course went on to have career in local government. And I think the other one, and I'm not sure he was 18, but I know he was very young, was Jim Bennett.
Oh yeah,
Who was elected to the council in Lisbon.
yeah, he was clearly under 20. Yeah,
right. And so I guess I don't have too much of a problem with going with 18. My biggest concern about that is the fact that we often have so many uncontested spots on the ballot, that it's not a question of whether the public gets to make a choice about whether somebody's qualified or not. It's that nobody else runs against them, and so they become almost by default an elected official. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things I don't like at all. I don't particularly like about what happens in Lewiston is there's not enough competition for elected offices sometimes. That's certainly been the case with the school committee, and at times it's been the case with the city council. I think I looked in the last round, 3 or 4 of the councilors had no, I think it was 3, had no opposition at all. And so that's my one reserve point there. Otherwise, I'd go along with that. Anything else on that one? Couple other small issues. The issue has come up as to whether candidates should be allowed to use nicknames on the ballot. This came up with Ed, whose last name I also can't remember, when he ran.
Oh,
was
Ed
on the
Hill,
school.
Walter Hill.
Yeah,
Ed
Walter Hill.
Yeah.
You know, and Walter Hill is his formal name, but a lot of people know him as Ed. And I know he had went around a little bit with the city clerk about using Ed on the ballot as opposed to Walter. That's the only situation here I'm aware of. I've been in other states where they allow that on the ballot, where you have your full name, but you can insert in parentheses your nickname. So it'd be like Joseph Joe Smith. I don't think it's a big issue, but it came up, so I thought I'd bring it up and see if people cared one way or the other, whether it was even worth dealing with.
A lot of people call me Stephen John F. Kennedy Morgan. So
Yeah. Well, that is one of the concerns, is that people can play games with that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know that it's probably not worth messing with simply because of that. You know, you can start putting weird things in there like Mickey Mouse or, all kinds of crazy things. So why don't we just leave that alone? I don't think it's a big enough issue
I
to mess
agree.
with.
I agree.
They can use their nicknames in their advertising and such and campaigning.
Yep.
Question about the candidates' order on the ballot. Right now it's alphabetical. There have been studies that show there's actually a small advantage picked up by being first on the ballot. So some places have gone to ballot placement by lot. Again, I don't know if it's anything that's been an issue or concern around here is even worth dealing with. It seems like a minor thing.
How
So
does-
sorry, Patty, go ahead. I
No, me too.
apologize.
I was just gonna say, how does that work by lot?
Whoever qualifies for the ballot, the city clerk would put their names on slips of paper and put them in a hat and shake them up and pull them out, and that would be the order on the ballot. Linda?
So I really don't have a big concern either way. I mean, I don't necessarily see a reason to change it. I've not heard, I mean, I've worked on a lot of campaigns locally in the community. There's a couple of times I've heard people say, I wish that it, wasn't alphabetical, but personally, as somebody that's run 3 times for school committee, and with the last name is Scott, so I usually always come last. I've never had an issue, so it's not a big thing for me.
Hey, some of us who have names that begin early in the alphabet
Yeah.
have punished all the way through life in Catholic schools by being placed in the first row. So I guess nobody really wants to deal with that. I don't think it's a big enough issue for us to be concerned about.
I think it's a bigger issue when there are several names on a ballot for an office. When it's just 2 or maybe 3 names, I think it's less of an issue,
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do that in Bangor, they do it by lot, but that's because everybody runs together and it's the top 3
Yeah,
candidates that get elected. So you'd have 9 names on the ballot.
yeah, I would be more concerned in that case, yeah.
Okay. So we'll leave that alone.
Okay.
The next one, there'll be no controversy over this. Instant runoff elections for mayor and/or council. Let me give you a little bit of background because I did get some information from the city clerk on this. Portland, of course, has gone to instant runoff or ranked choice.
Yep.
They pay about $50,000 an election because they have to bring in specialized equipment that's capable of handling the rank order system. None of those standard voting machines in the state can do that. So it's fairly expensive and they have to bring in a company to set up and do all of the counting. For us, the advantage obviously is at the mayor's level, you could potentially avoid the December runoff election, which is A, at a bad time of the year, and B, one more election. That again, the number of mayoral runoff elections, that's been a fairly recent thing in Lewiston. I guess historically there haven't been that many of them. And recently here we've had 3 out of, or 4 out of, I guess all of them ones recent.
Pretty much all of them.
We've had
Not the last
more
one,
than
right? Yep.
2 candidates recently. The last one we didn't because it was just Charlie who was running, so that he didn't get enough votes to cause an issue. We've had 3 runoff elections before that. But I think historically beyond that, it hasn't happened that often. I guess my suggestion at this point would be that the cost and the technology isn't there yet. Even if you wanted to do it, it probably is not something that I would pursue at the moment. And if it's something that as the technology changes or voting machines are replaced in the future, could be considered then. So that's kind of where I am on it. I think avoiding the runoff election would be great if we could avoid it, but Linda.
So let me ask a question. So if we decide that, so I'm personally not a fan of it, putting it on there, but if we decide that that's not an issue for us, but city council decides, because I know that there are 2 members of the city council that have specifically mentioned this when ranked choice voting. If they decide that they want to bring this up, they're going to go to a commission or whatever they decide, they can still do that no matter what we suggest, correct?
Yes, and I'm not sure. I know there's been some, that would be also a legal issue, whether that would require a
Right.
charter commission or not. I wouldn't think it would, because that's a fairly simple change to make in the charter. It doesn't really bollocks up a whole lot of other sections. But they could certainly put it out on their own. That doesn't have to come through us if they wanted to.
Well, I think that if we don't have the financial capabilities or the machines to run that, an additional 50,000, I'm against it. Sorry. I'm not a big fan.
And Patty, I know you're not a fan.
Well,
Anyone,
I have some,
anyone? Go ahead, Patty.
I was just gonna say, I have some comments. Number one, they call it instant runoff election. It's not instant runoff election. Because if I want to vote for somebody and I vote for them and they don't win, who knows who's going to be the person in second place? I didn't vote for that person. So that's not instant runoff. I think one of the answers to this, I think, even to save the city even more money, is to move the mayoral race to plurality as well. Why did that ever go to 51% or whatever? If that was plurality, then the one with the most vote wins, just like the city council. I don't know why it's different. And my recommendation would change the mayoral race to plurality. There's no other election
Roger?
after that.
Beg your pardon?
Roger?
Yeah.
Roger, you want to explain why you went with a majority for mayor back when charter was redone?
Well, I was just trying to see if I could find, if memory serves, and it does less and less often all the time, although long-term memory is usually pretty good. When there was an attempt to adopt a new charter back in 1971, I believe, it was defeated. The proposed new charter was defeated at referendum. And one of the reasons that many observers felt that it failed was that new proposed charter did not provide for a mayoral runoff election. And that a lot of people felt that that was not a good idea. That I guess they didn't want to see a mayor elected by just a plurality. So I believe that was one of the reasons why we went with the runoff, to ensure that a mayor-elect would have, will win by a majority vote. I'm going to double check that, but I think that was one of the reasons we did, so that we just wouldn't have that as an issue that might sink the charter.
I believe if you look back, in at least two occasions, I believe the plurality winner in November did not win the runoff election.
Mhm.
So that's something else to keep in mind, is that I know there are concerns about the process and how it works when you do instant runoff, but in terms of the runoff election, it actually has flipped results from a plurality. Any other thoughts on this?
I think you could make a stronger case for the runoff if you had a mayor with more power than we grant our mayor currently. Our mayor does not have a vote, has the appointment power. I think you could make a stronger case for the need for, a runoff in that case.
Good point.
Ed, do we know about how much a runoff election costs?
I had asked Kathy that, but I haven't gotten an answer back. I'm thinking it's not very much, because we normally just have one polling place set up, and I'm guessing that, and Dennis, maybe you can help here, less than $5,000.
I was going to say somewhere around 3,500 to 5,000 would be my guess. So I think you're right in that range, somewhere around there.
Mhm.
So it's a significant difference between the cost of the runoff election in December and the cost of the equipment needed to handle the ranked choice.
Yeah, as things stand today, yes.
So to me, I know turnout tends to probably be
everybody
lower
else
in
having
December.
computer issues? Everybody's getting in and out and choppy. Am I the only one seeing that?
I'm seeing a little bit of it, but not that much.
No, me neither. I'm not seeing anything.
I'm a little
No.
choppy too.
Sounds good to me.
It might be my internet.
Mine seems to be okay.
You like yours on mute, Steve.
So just trying to read the tea leaves here, it seems like that there's a split opinion on going to ranked choice, but that given the potential cost and state of the technology, voting technology right now, we would not recommend it at this time.
Yes.
Sound good?
Yep, I don't feel too strongly.
Okay,
I have something else on the same subject.
sure.
I'd like to actually put it out there that we add voter ID to Lewiston's residents. I think voter ID makes it easy to vote and hard to cheat. And I think that's what I'd like to see incorporated into our elections. And this is
Any-
Lewiston only. We're not Portland, we're not Maine, we're just Lewiston. We can make that change, right? If people are on board for it.
That's a good, I mean, that might be a legal question, I suspect. To be honest, that would be one I would actually have to ask the attorney about, since it's not a requirement of state law.
Yeah, I would be opposed. That's a solution in search of a problem.
Anybody else want to advance that proposal?
I would be concerned that if it's not state law, that I would think that we would need a legal opinion before we would make that choice. I would like to hear a legal opinion on that.
We can certainly ask.
I fed
Any other comments on that one? Okay. I think the only other thing I saw, and I'm not sure it's worth us messing with, is that the charter calls for a runoff election in case of a tie in another race. So if two council members tie, there has to be a runoff election. Some other places do things like flip a coin, draw a lot, stuff like that. But I would again think that that would be not worth messing with because it's so unusual. I don't think it's ever happened that we've had a tie, at least that I'm aware of. So I don't think it's worth messing with at this point.
Yeah, been some close ones, but no ties, I don't think so.
Yeah, there have been a few recounts, but even
Well, that's
those,
what I was thinking. Recently, we've had a couple of recounts, haven't we? At least 2 or 3 maybe in the last 5 years.
we've had some that I think, we've had a couple of recounts and we've had, I think, 1 ballot inspection
Mhm.
where they just checked some of the ballots and decided
Yeah.
not to proceed.
So
I
Ed,
think
is
you're-
this the section where we could actually bring back the duel?
Sure, why not?
I seem to recall an extremely close state senate race in Lewiston not too long ago.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
13.
you're right. It was
A
a
very
very
close
close
one.
race.
Well, I know that there was a recount ballot for Ward 7 last election. We had a recount on that because I sat on that. So,
Right.
yep. So I prefer to leave it alone, I think.
Yeah, I
And
think that
do
makes
that.
sense. Okay, so that means we've gotten through everything once. I sent out a little summary of what I thought we had decided over the weekend, and in terms of change, the things we hadn't discussed, in terms of changes that we've supported, changes we are not supporting, and issues that are still on our list. The biggest set of issues on our list are, of course, the big structural issues about staggered terms, the role of the mayor, those kinds of things. So since we're looking at a June deadline, if the council wants to pursue a charter commission right away, I thought it might be appropriate for us to revisit that issue at tonight's discussion. And even if we can't come up with a final decision, we might be able to at least inform the council that they ought to think about gearing up to elect a charter commission if they really want to pursue some of those structural changes.
Mhm.
So I sat down and tried to figure out how to do this, and it gets, as we've talked about before, it gets more and more complicated. So I'm going to start with how to do it the simplest way possible first, and then we can go from there.
Mhm.
There seemed to be a lot of support for staggered terms on the council. There are 2 ways that can be done relatively easily. One is staggered terms with annual elections. So all we do is keep the 2-year term on council members and have elections each year. 1 year for the mayor and 3, and the next year for 4 council members. You'd have to offset that kind of reverse ways with the at-large school committee member, so that there would be at least something on everybody's ballot of the citywide nature in each election. That would require, of course, another election. It wouldn't be as difficult because it'd be part of the state election, state or federal election, so it wouldn't be that expensive. But it does raise the issue of whether the local election would get lost in the, whatever you want to call goes on these days with state and national elections, where you know the complete and total inundation of everything. And I know that's been a concern in the past. So that would be relatively easy to accomplish. You could also do the same thing by moving the council members only, the council and the school committee members only to 4-year terms. So the mayor would stay on a 2-year cycle so that he'd be up for election in every election, and the council and the school committee would be split between the 2 elections. That would keep the city election in off years in November from the state and federal election, and would ensure again that the mayor in particular would be on the ballot each time. The counter argument there is the mayor is going to feel upset that he has to run twice as much as everybody else potentially.
Justifiably so.
So if you went with the mayor being up every 4 years as well, that's where you start running into more complications with making sure that everybody's on the ballot. If you give the mayor the vote, then it gets much more complicated because then you have to add another position to the council.
Yep.
And I've given some thought to the issue of the mayor voting, and I've always generally been in favor of that idea. But when it comes right down to it, the change that was made last time, which gives the mayor a vote on a tie or a vote when somebody's absent, anytime there is a key vote, in some ways, the mayor can participate in those key votes. If the vote's 4-3, then he obviously can't. But if it's 3-3 because somebody's absent, he gets to cast a vote in that instance. So he does have a certain level of swing authority when he gets to vote in a situation where there's a tie, when somebody's absent and there's a tie. Obviously, it's not the same as voting on in every instance, though. The argument there is at least gives you a record of who's this mayor we really are. Where's he come down on the big issues? If he's not voting on them, you may not know. But that gets much more complicated. And so if you give the mayor the vote, then you either have to get rid of a council member, which I don't think is going to work, because then you'd have to redraw the ward lines, and that could be problematic. Or you'd have to add an at-large position. Roger brought up the issue, would that create a kind of inherent conflict between the 2 citywide elected officials? Would you have in effect a mayor and a mayor in waiting on the council at the same time fighting it out? And he noted that a lot of places that do have at-large people, there's more than 1. Did Auburn have 2?
2.
Yes.
Yeah.
2.
So, and then the really crazy idea is, you end up with 8 elected officials who can vote, and if there's a tie, the mayor gets an extra quarter point. And that obviously has all kinds of probably bad ideas associated with it, but it is an alternative. What do folks think? I mean, I get the impression is everybody still favors staggered terms. We'll start just with that one.
I do, yes.
I do also.
Okay, everybody
also.
favors that, so it seems we're in accord there.
Well, I would say I still like the idea of staggered terms. But I'm not sure that I like any of the ways to get there. your ABCs here, Ed, and thank you so much for doing this. I don't want to see annual municipal elections. I think that really dilutes the significance of them. There may be less voter interest. That might get confusing. One of the times that'd be in the off year, the other election would be in the regular election year. I don't think we should have councilors serving 4-year terms and mayor 2-year terms.
Right.
And I don't think we want everybody having 4-year terms. We've mentioned, and I think we're correct, that we don't have enough people running for these offices. I think you'd have fewer people running for these offices if they have to commit to a 4-year term and not just a 2-year term. So I still, in theory, like the staggered terms. I just don't like any of the ways to get there.
I'll chime in for a moment.
Sure, Francis.
Yeah, Roger points out a good point there. But I will say the reason for bringing up the staggered terms is because right now, especially from what I saw from the school committee, was that, everybody's running at once and you could literally have a clean slate, which is the way it could be. And the reason why the idea of staggered terms works on both sides, city council, is that you always have somebody with experience on those committees. And so, but how do we get there and what's the best method? I think we can certainly make a recommendation, but I think it's gonna ultimately become this council or the voters' decision when it comes to it, depending on, we're going to commission.
Yeah, I will tell you as somebody.
But which way's the best, right?
As somebody who's been on the management side of the house, the fact that all the elected officials are up every 2 years is a negative for professional managers looking at the potential of applying for the job here. I was in a unique situation where I didn't have to worry so much about either tenure in the position or leaving another job because I was already in the process of doing that. But if I had been looking to apply elsewhere, that would have been a real negative for applying to Lewiston. And I think if you look back at it, it has had somewhat of an effect on Lewiston having pretty rapid turnover in the management position up until I got here. Between the time that Lucian moved on and the time I was in, I think Jim Bennett maybe had the most tenure with, he was here, what, 7?
Bob Mulready maybe had a longer time.
Yeah. So I just throw that out there from my perspective. I even raised the issue in my hire when I was interviewed of, or do you really want to hire somebody now when you're going to have a council election and and at that point, that year was, I think it was 6 new council members coming on.
Wow.
And it's going to be somewhat that same situation potentially this year with Dennis leaving, that you're going to be in the middle of hiring someone who's going to be brought on board with a couple months maybe before a major council change. So I think it is a problem, but I agree it gets complicated on how to fix it.
Yeah.
I really liked 9 council members with 3 up every year. That was the situation in Bangor. That was a very nice system, even though it did end up coinciding with federal elections periodically, because you'd get 1 or 2 new council members every year that you could move in, get organized, that you didn't have to change the whole culture of the council.
3-year terms?
Yeah.
It was 3, and how many were at large, Ed, or were they all zoned in,
They were
or?
all at large, which is how they could do that.
Okay, all right.
And we
So we
couldn't do
can
that
add
here.
2 at large. We can add 2 at large positions and then follow that model.
Then that would be right, and that would still keep the mayor without the vote and
Yeah,
having him have the appointment power, and then you wouldn't have to worry about the at-large being the one that's possibly fighting more with the mayor than, because if it was two, right? You'd have two people versus the
Mhm.
mayor and one person who both got elected by the whole community.
I
I don't know, Jen, I kind of like that idea.
Steve, you were gonna say?
I like that idea. I think 3 years is a good amount. 2 years is just enough when you got your feet fully wet and
Mhm.
then you're possibly out. And 3 years and having 6 people know what's going on when the new 3 counselors come in, that's
Right.
not a bad idea.
Yeah, there's another very strange dynamic that happens sometimes, and that I've seen this before, is that somebody will run for election and get elected. And then when it comes time to run again, the potential that they see that they might not be reelected is much worse than not being, for them personally, than not being elected the first time. So there's kind of a disincentive for some people to run again because they don't want to risk not being elected when they've been in office already. Kind
So
of a weird reverse incentive.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, Steve.
So you would keep the 7 wards and just add on 2 at-large positions in this scenario?
Yes.
And well, the 7 wards represent the entire city, so everybody runs for the 7 wards and then the highest 2 outside totals get that, or do you run separate just for the at-large?
You would run separate for the at-large.
Yeah.
And how would that work with the school committee? Would that change anything? I mean, if we're looking at staggered terms, are we just talking city council or staggered terms for school committee too? And if we are talking school committee, that's a different number, right?
School committee's currently 8.
Right?
So you would do, if you did 3s, you'd do 3, 3, and 2.
Okay.
And probably in the year with 2, you would do the at-large member.
Okay.
Patty,
I would probably also, I like that idea, Jennifer. But I would say there would probably want to be a rule in there that the 2 at-large cannot be from the same ward.
I would agree with
No.
that.
Just so there's not like, Ward 1's getting 3 people to represent that area rather than, with the Board of Appeals, you can't have more than 2 people from
Right.
any one ward served. So I would want to put that stipulation in there.
I'm just trying to think how you could do that.
Right.
Given that there's right now, what is it for mayor? 50 signatures to get nominated for mayor, I think it is.
100 signatures for
So-
mayor, right? 100 for
100.
mayor, 50 for city council and school.
Okay. So you would be looking at probably 100 signatures, and if 3 people got 100 signatures and 2 of them were in the same ward, or, I mean, at what point do you disqualify them from running is
Right.
basically the problem. So I'm not sure there's a way to do that. Roger, you're looking thoughtful.
Well, I think I may have a question, but on that, if they're at large, it's, if they're running at large, they have to run citywide. I'm not sure that where they live matters much. They live in Lewiston. They have to serve the constituents are all the residents, all the voters of Lewiston. But as far as how we would break this down, you said that the 2 at-large councilors would be elected at the same time, or does that matter?
No, I would probably have an at-large in one election, an at-large in another election, and the mayor in the third.
Oh, I see.
So that you always had a citywide person on the
okay.
ballot.
With 3-year terms.
I like that.
I do too.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I
Way
could
to
live
go,
with it.
Jen.
Right? Seriously, yay, Jen.
Let me see, I'll sit down and try to put it in writing in black and white. And we can all take a look at it before we finalize that recommendation.
Okay.
On the mayor, do we want to, and I know this will further complicate the universe. Do we want to make a change in the mayor's authority to vote? I guess I've finally moved to where I don't think so.
I don't
I
think so
think
either.
leaving it as it is when he gets to vote on to break a tie, or if somebody's absent, gives him enough of a standing in the process
Yep.
that he does have an influence when it's potentially important. Otherwise, he will continue as he has in the past to have, well, I'll call that informal influence that mayors tend to bring to the position.
Yep.
Some of that do that better than others. With some of them have a lot of influence among council members. Others that they don't. Kind of depends on their personal style and how they interact. So I guess I've come around and said, let's not mess with that, because that really does change things significantly and really screws up everything else if you want to go to staggered terms and stuff like that.
I'd leave it as is.
Okay.
So I would agree with that also, but I would also think that we would not want to change the appointment status for the mayor if we're going to do that. If the mayor's not voting, then I think that the mayor should have the opportunity to do those appointments that they do now.
Yeah, I think I would generally agree with that. I just did want to revisit the issue of the planning board and the board of appeals. Those are the two charter created boards. Particularly the planning board, more than even the board of appeals, because planning board is so involved in creating the community's future. Whether we might want to change just that board to having council confirmation. I'll just throw that out there and see what people think.
I would be comfortable with that.
Comfortable with council confirmation on it.
Patty, I know you're big on keeping things, appointment stuff the way it is.
I can't imagine many scenarios where the council's going to override the mayor's appointment. If the mayor thinks that the person would be a quality candidate for a particular committee or whatever, I think that the majority of people on the council are going to feel the same way.
Okay, I can write that up, and Patty, if you're not comfortable with that, we can certainly make a note of that in the report.
No, I'm comfortable.
Okay,
I'm in agreement with everything.
okay. Now, do we want to go back to the stuff that the rest of the stuff that we left aside were salaries for elected officials, and Dennis sent out something on that. I think it's clear that we're interested in making a recommendation outside of the charter that those salaries be adjusted. Do we want to make a recommendation as to amounts, or do we want to just say, you guys need to raise them? It's up to you how much.
I will make a notation that I was shocked when I went through them all that they get paid as
I would,
they do.
yeah, I agree, Steve. I was a little surprised at some of those numbers. What was it? Westbrook or I don't know. I can't remember. It was like, yeah, that was quite a lot for it was like 6,000 or something. And yeah,
But most of them are quite low though, still. Yep.
they were.
Yeah.
The majority of them were low.
In most cities, they're still very low. Yep.
You know, having done it before, as most of you have, I think, in one form or another, you can say it's a volunteer and you're here to help your city and all that stuff, and you want to be active in the city, but it's still time consuming, which takes time away from your family, your work, if you happen to be working and not be Roger, and all those other things, you know. So I don't know. I think it's you know, when my wife and I got the check every month for whatever it was, $50 when I was on the planning board, we could go out to dinner real quick or
It's true that you don't rely on that money. You know, it
No.
was $100 on the school committee, which is actually less than that. It was like $93.72 because of taxes or something. and the little bit shy of $50 for planning board, you put in a lot more work than that. So, and I do have concerns that city councilors don't take this issue on as their sitting councilors. I understand why they would choose not to, but I think that a recommendation from us saying that, really this needs to be, I think it needs to be addressed.
I do too. I think it needs to be adjusted, and I think it should go up, maybe by not as much as I was thinking initially after I saw what everyone the towns were, but if I was going to pick a number and it's 2,700 for the councilors, I think 3,000 or 3,200 is a ballpark figure that I still support myself. For the
And might the council be more likely to finally pull the trigger on this if they have a recommendation from us to,
Right.
well, pursuant to the recommendation of the charter committee, I move that we increase it might make it a little easier for them to do that. I was pretty close to you, Steve. I was thinking maybe 2,700 to 3,600. And then under the 1980, when the current charter first came into existence, the mayor was making twice what the councilors were making. It's less than that now.
We should also note that we're the second largest city in the state.
Yeah, I think 3672 would be something I could support, but I'm certainly open.
Can I make a point here? I was interested in that list too. It's kind of made me chuckle a few times and make me go wow on a few other. And we could go looking well beyond our borders and look around the country and what other people and other communities do, and we'd find all kinds of things, right? We'd find all kinds of different things. But what I would suggest is this charter reopens every 10 years, and this is something that doesn't normally get looked at as well. And I think it was Linda one time pointed out that the school committee hasn't received an increase since Linda, what did you tell me? It was like 1890 something?
1892. If you look at the Doug Hodgkins book on the history of Lewiston and politics in Lewiston, it was quite amazing when you looked at the school committee made $100 back in 1892 to serve on the school committee. And here we are 100 years and more later, and it's still $100.
So my suggestion is,
Well, that must have been big money though at that time.
Oh, I know, right?
You sure it wasn't $100 a year?
yeah, if it was the same today, we would be looking at over $30,000. If you were, and you were appointed by the mayor at the time.
Yeah.
Now, what I would suggest is we need we look at it from a different perspective. Let's not look at it as this community does this, that community does this. How do we make it so that we can compensate those who are elected or whatever you want to call it, and say, look, we realize you put the work and effort into this, and this is how it's going to work. And I would ask to put in a percentage based on something, whether it's the minimum wage or some other form, price of living, whatever it is. But a percentage is in there somehow that in 20 years, that percentage has gone up a certain amount, that that $100 has gone up, let's say 3% every year, or I don't know how it is, but I'm just saying, if we put a percentage in there, then something doesn't sit there for over 100 years and it doesn't go up, because I don't think anybody else in our community really thinks about, hey, $100, okay. I don't think they know, you know what I mean? They really don't realize the work and the effort that goes into it. So that's my thought. I think that this is something that would require a lot of discussion. I don't know if it has to be done here, but we can certainly discuss it. I'm open, but that's how I would go about it.
Other thoughts? I mean, I'm hearing something in the range of $3,500 for a council member. You wanted to go, mayor gets twice that, that would be $7,000 for the mayor. And everybody on the school committee, whether they're the at-large or the chair or anything, gets the same amount? Is
Yes,
that correct?
yes.
So tie them into the same level as the council?
Yes.
Sound reasonable?
Yeah.
That's to me.
Apparently in 1892, they thought a lot of schools and
I don't want to ask how much the mayor was being, how much
Yeah.
was being kicked back to the mayor to get appointed. That was my first thought. You want to be on the school committee, huh?
Yeah, right?
And just to, in 1980, the salaries were set at 1,800 for the council and 3,600 for the mayor. Adjusted for inflation, that would now be 5,800 for the council and 11,600 for the mayor. And it just kept pace for inflation since then.
Wow. Now, see, that would have to be something that would be budgeted if we went with a percentage each year, right? That would have to be, whereas right now it's in the budget automatically part of the the general fund or whatever it is, and but if you had to have a percentage for percentage of living per year, that would change the number, so that would then become a budget discussion possibly.
Yeah, and remember
Especially like
that
this year.
that by charter, those salaries cannot be increased during a term of the council.
Right.
That's a
So
good.
if you increased it today, it could go into effect next year, but then it can't be changed until 2 years after that. So, I think the idea of a percentage increase makes some sense, but I think it's going to be very hard to implement that without putting real numbers in the charter.
Yeah.
Which I
Yeah.
think you don't want to go to. I
Don't
would
wanna do
not
that.
suggest you take it to the public, because the public's going to say, I don't pay them anything.
Right.
And I have a question.
Yes.
If the council votes to increase salaries, it's not effective until the new council term, how's that going to play in with staggered elections and a third of the new councilors potentially every year?
You would not get the increase until you started a new term.
And okay,
So there might be a period of time where an old counselor was being paid less than a new counselor.
all right, that was the scenario result I played out in my head. I just wanted to make sure I
Yeah.
was thinking it through. Okay.
The reality is that it's fairly infrequent that these numbers will actually change, as we've shown here historically. And I think that's pretty much the same you'll see in almost every community. It's not something that elected officials like to touch because of concern over them being accused of, trying to put money in their own pocket.
Mhm.
Okay, so we can do that. Let's see. Let me find my right list here.
Confused, Ed. What did you mean by we can do that?
Go ahead with recommending that they increase the salaries and take the council salaries to council and school committee salaries to 3,500 and the mayor to 7,000.
Okay, is the school committee and city council matching? Is that what you just said?
Yes.
Okay. And are we not presenting a percentage?
I would not. I can appreciate the
agree.
logic of it, but I think it's difficult to find a way to implement that outside of putting it in the charter, which I don't think I would like to do.
And you said it was difficult, then we would, if we put a percentage, they wouldn't get the increase until the next election. But what if it is increased by, there's a scale that says, every year this is the increase?
It would have to.
Do you understand what I'm saying? That there's
Yeah, I understand. It would have to be done by ordinance. If we didn't want it in the charter, which I don't think I would recommend, they could probably adopt an ordinance that said be increased effective January of every odd year or every even year subsequent to the election, the prior November election. So,
Yeah, because the reason I see
whatever the
why
new council takes place.
I see why the counselors don't want to touch this because for a number of reasons, but I think they always wait and rely on a charter because their excuse is always, that's not in my hands, that's the charter. That's the excuse that they always bring up.
Well,
So-
yeah, but that's not true because the charter basically, all the charter says is any increase in salaries cannot go into effect until after the next election.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just saying that's the excuse.
It's by ordinance, they can do it. And Steve,
Yeah, I understand that, but that's the excuse. That's all I'm saying. Because they don't want to touch it. I get it. So here we are. So that's why I'm bringing that up because I understand why folks imagine that this is a volunteer position. And because over the years, we've diluted that percentage and that number. If we gave it a proactive approach, I think we see a lot more people on the ballot. That's what I'm getting at. And I think that's how we should present it to the city council.
okay, any other thoughts on that?
If nobody's interested, I'm fine taking that off. I'm just saying, like the example of school committee haven't been increased over 100 years. Basically, there was a huge devaluation. School committee is, less than the city council. It became sense. There was no value to the school committee.
Yeah.
When in fact, when you finally get to the school committee, you get very well surprised. Now I wasn't, but a lot of folks get on there and they're like, oh my God, there's so much work. And if you talk to a lot of elected officials, they'll tell you there's a lot, oftentimes, depending on what you're doing on the school committee, there's a lot more work than city council. Now that's a debate, but I'll just, depends what you're doing.
Right.
So I
Any
guess
other-
I guess I would be, so I agree with Francis and what he's saying. My only concern is that if we suggest a percentage rate without just suggesting a recommended, uptick in what the actual amount of money is, and that it would become a budget issue each year. It would become a budget discussion. And I think that if maybe where we can make sure that it is looked at more often is that we suggest not only that they do make the changes and change the ordinance so that for the next people coming in, it might be more, but we also suggest that maybe it's looked at every time the charter is looked at, so that if they have held off in doing anything in 10 years, that discussion is happening again and they're talking about it again so that it doesn't go another 100 years or whatever.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
would certainly be a possibility.
And and Ed, probably, what's the concern of it being a budget issue every year?
I don't think it's a terrible concern. I mean, we wouldn't be talking about a huge amount of money. It's not like a 3% increase for everybody in the police department, where you start talking about real amounts of money.
And maybe
Mm-hmm.
The issue is how you establish that percentage.
Well, that's what I was thinking. How do you establish that percentage? And having watched every city council meeting over the last year and a half, because obviously I have nothing better to do, that this is my COVID life here. I see this being a discussion. I've seen some things come up and I see this being something that they're going to discuss, and we're going to have long talks about during budget season about this one little percentage or 2%, when if we can maybe have them establish something and it's looked at in a few years, that's something that doesn't have to go. I'm just thinking for an easier route without having another discussion over $5,000 for everybody that's elected, and that being on the parking lot list. I'm sure you love that word, Dennis.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly is an option, is to put something recommend that it be looked at every time the charter is reviewed. The only other way I could see on hitting a percentage would be to do something like adopt the increase in Social Security. Because if you look back over time, I remember I actually had a 16.5% mortgage at one point in my life.
Mm-hmm.
These days, inflation has been running generally below 2%. It's probably going to bump up to higher this year, but we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Maybe we'll be back to 7, 8, 10% to drive all the real estate people crazy. So that if you wanted to put some standard in, that would be the only one I can think of.
Yeah, and Roger brought up the price of living. Either one I'm fine, but we could even make our own too. We could say a percentage and a half per year as well. I mean, that's just another suggestion.
I think I kind of like the approach of having it where it's looked at every time the charter is reviewed
I think so.
by committee. That way, you know, you go through a 10-year period and then there ought to be an adjustment made. I also, you know, I don't think Francis's proposal would get us there, but I think people generally do see city council members and school court members as being volunteers, not employees. So,
Mhm.
I was going to go back to that. That's what I said initially. It's a volunteer position for the council, for the mayor, for
For all
everybody.
of it, yeah.
But, and at some point you're not, obviously, when you look at the salaries, you're not getting into it for the money. Maybe if you're running
Right.
for Portland mayor, but other than that, you're not getting into it for the money.
yeah, my feeling has always been that yes, it's a volunteer position, but you shouldn't be asked to have to pay out of your pocket for expenses and, you know, recognizing the cost of just driving to and from City Hall, to and from events, time you give up. There ought to be some payment to offset some of that loss.
Mhm.
Okay. So I think the approach is to ask them to put something in that would have it reviewed by the chart whenever the charter is reviewed.
So
And
does
also
the charter
suggest-
committee review it?
Yes.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
And
Have
then,
the,
and now that it's being reviewed, we're really not making any changes to it, but we're discussing it. So
right.
how currently did those changes in salary get made? The city councilors vote on it?
It's an ordinance, so the city council has to amend the ordinance. So yes, the council has to do it.
Okay.
Okay, let's see here now. What else don't we have? Let's see, we're waiting on some legal opinions, and I'll put something together for Dennis on that. We need an opinion on the city administrator's employment agreement, whether it complies with the charter provisions. We had talked about establishing a term of length to the city attorney. Is there any interest in that?
I think it's a good idea to have a certain length.
Is that so we get somebody new after 10 years, or what are you thinking, Steve, on that?
That's what I'm thinking.
Okay,
Every 10 years or something like that, that it should be reviewed and decided upon.
Yeah, I mean, you could go back to the same person, but at least there would be a point in time where it would be reviewed.
Right, but they could stay with the same one.
They could stay with the
Might
same
be an
one.
arbitrary limit, right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm good with that.
because I will tell you, changing attorneys would be very painful.
Yeah.
10 years?
Mhm.
Oh.
Yeah, I go along with that.
We're waiting to hear back from folks on associate members of the planning board and the Board of Appeals. Any feedback from anybody on that?
Yeah, so I did bring it up. So we had our planning board meeting last week and I brought up both points that we had talked about, both the 5-year term and associate members. The associate members first, there was not one negative response to associate members. Everybody on the planning board said that they felt that an associate member was an important aspect and that it gave somebody an opportunity to learn more before they became a full member. And they were very much in favor of that. There was a split decision when it came to 5-year terms. Some agreed like that. Others said that they thought a 3-year term is also a very good idea for the planning board. So that was kind of split.
Okay. Patty, you haven't had a Board of Appeals meeting?
No, and actually we were
You may
talking about,
not.
we're talking about the payments to serve on the committee, and I'm thinking, I think I'm overpaid. We get paid monthly and we might meet 3 times a year. I'm like, wow, I gotta give some money back, even though it's $40 a month.
Yeah,
But I'm overpaid. I think I agree. The associate members are very important, and I think we'd want to hold on to those. And looking at terms, I mean, if we're looking at the counselors and school committee members having 3-year terms, maybe the Board of Appeals and Planning Board would go along with that. They could be in the same elections, or, well, it's an appointment process,
Right.
but it makes
Yep.
sense to go along with the mayoral
Yeah.
if they're gonna have a 3-year term. They're
That
gonna
does-
appoint somebody for that time.
That does make sense. One of the questions there, I know we had talked about 3 full term limit for the planning board. I don't know that that's necessary for the Board of Appeals. You know, because that Board of Appeals, you really want some people on that who have, we don't call on them that often.
Right.
And but when they do get to make a decision, you hope you have people on the board that understand how things work, because they're basically, you know, dealing with appeals from other. So,
Yes, there are a few attorneys that serve on the board, and I appreciate it very much.
and that can be very helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, the GNP IPD spending limit and legal issues surrounding it. That I got a semi-legal opinion, but I'm not sure that it really totally answered the question. So I'm following up a little bit on it. There was a little bit of confusion, I think, about how the question was asked. We're looking for a legal opinion on clarifying the Finance Committee's role in school purchasing. I have drafted and have to redraft how the budget would get adopted. So I will get that language out to you for our next meeting. Basically trying to bring us into line with state law is one set of changes, and then the other set is simply making how to deal with the council not adopting a budget at the end of the process in a timely way, how to deal with that in a more implementable fashion. Linda sent out some language today on the potential preamble to the charter, so you might take a look at that and comment on that. There is some language in that also addresses the anti-discrimination provision that's in our current charter. That provision is no longer lining up with state or federal law. So we probably ought to ensure that everybody that we've covered for, you know, race, religion, all those kinds of things, that it covers everything else that's already been pulled into anti-discrimination law or the city's rules and regulations and ordinances.
Yep.
And pull those into the charter as well. I haven't had a chance yet, but I'm still going to try to look around and see if I can find some language we could put in that would allow appointees to be removed from office if they do weird and wonderful things that aren't particularly forfeitures level, but need to be addressed in some way. So I'm trying to find something there. I'm probably missing stuff. Is there anything else anybody can think of? Patty?
The voter ID proposition.
We'll put that on the list for further discussion and check with legal. Linda?
So I guess I would just ask now, because I was looking at the calendar earlier today. City Council has a meeting on the 1st and the 15th of June and a meeting tomorrow night. Is that correct, Dennis? That's all that there is, right? And they want a recommendation by June.
That would be June 15th.
So are we going to plan on meeting again and finishing up this discussion, or how do we wrap this up? Because time flies so fast, and I'm just thinking, how do we make sure that we get everything in place so that they have enough time to do that, to have that discussion? Because they may want to add things too and change up and decide. I don't know. They had a fairly long discussion in their workshop, right, Dennis? About
They
this.
did. Yeah, they did. They spoke for about a half hour on this and went around. So you're right. So there is a meeting June 1st workshop. I would envision this being workshopped with the council. So that's really anytime, any of those meetings. So the 1st, the 8th, or the 15th, that could be done.
Okay.
Because they don't necessarily have to take action the same evening. We just, it's actually better for them to just have the workshop and hear the recommendation. And then they can decide based on that workshop, they can provide direction to me to either place action on the next agenda. So if it, say, for example, was to, move forward with or accepting the recommendations and moving them to the voters, they could do that at the next meeting. They wouldn't do that the same night we workshopped it. So.
Okay. But they have to officially vote on starting a commission to go that route?
Yes, I believe they
Yes.
would. They would have
Okay.
to take that. Yes, because they would have to take the action even on the minor changes to just send those to the voters. They would also have to take that action as well to actually send those, right, Ed? I believe so.
Yeah, but the minor changes we can propose later because you don't have to allow for a period of time for nominating petitions to be sent out for the Charter Commission.
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, it'll be interesting to see if they do decide to go for a Charter Commission, if they ever, it's going to take some work to get that up and going and trying to get people interested in running for election for that commission.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not totally convinced it's going to work, even if they make a decision to try it in
Well, we've
in
got an
June.
election year for city council, school committee. If we add charter commission in there, and we sometimes don't have enough people to run for the other seats, how are we going to get those potentially 7 more seats filled?
I mean, that's a good question.
Yep.
And I do want, I guess I don't want any false sense of urgencies, I guess, in terms of timelines. So yes, as Ed said, June is what the council or the city clerk, I would actually probably correct that a little bit, and was saying that if we want to have this election for a charter commission in November, she needs it by June, right? She needs that process to get rolling. The reality is, and I think we spoke about this, Ed, maybe it was either in this meeting or offline, I can't remember, but I know we said, really, the election of the charter commission could occur in the around the school referendum in the spring, the following year. It doesn't have to be in November, right? It just has to happen during an election. So we don't want to have a special election for this. And the reality is, it doesn't have to be November 2021. It could be November 2022. So.
Okay.
You really, it's just what she was really stressing, Kathy, was to us is if you want it now, you got to get it to me in June. So the reality is, if we're good with a different timeline, then the committee can certainly bring that back, and we could maybe workshop with the council, a check-in, so to speak, of where the recommendations are and timelines. And maybe that's an approach. And if there's no sense of urgency in the timeline, there's nothing that stops you from going a little further into this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously a little bit nervous about trying to rush things. We certainly could, get back to the council in advance of the 15th and give them an update. I was just looking at the calendar, and theoretically, if we were continuing to meet on a 2-week basis, the next time we could meet would be the 31st, but that's Memorial Day. I don't know that people would want to sit and have a Zoom meeting on Memorial Day. And then
No.
we start running into problems with Francis's schedule if we try to move to Wednesday or Thursday. Is that still your schedule, Francis?
Well, I know next week it's insane because it's graduation week at Bates. There are days I'm working till 1 a.m. and then back in at 6 a.m. So, but after that, it's summer. So my schedule could potentially be changing again. So I will keep you posted, but it's not helpful right now.
So basically we would be looking at the 7th, but that would be a Monday, the 7th would work for our next meeting. That's the day before the council meets on the 8th. In workshop, if we wanted to workshop something with them then,
Okay.
but that doesn't give everybody a lot of time to look at stuff. I mean, one of the options is I can write something up on the big issue of staggered terms and going to 3-year terms and adding 2 at-large council members and get that around for people to comment on. And potentially we could update the council and just tell them that it looks like we'll be recommending something that most likely would require a charter commission. And if they wanted to have it done sooner than possible, they'd need to get organized and get it going.
I would agree. I'm not a fan of rushing. I think we've got some big ticket items here that we're discussing. And I think it's important that we vet it out and have those conversations. I would not be adverse to meeting though, possibly with the council, like maybe on the 8th, and giving them an update as to where we're at and the discussions that we're having and the need for possibly more discussion.
Mhm.
Yep.
If that sounds like a plan, I will go ahead and write something up with the items we talked about on staggered terms, 3-year terms, stuff like that. I can also start trying to go through and put together the actual charter amendments that we might want to present, so that we can start taking a look at the specific language.
Mhm.
Life would be easier if you could. Always love how Microsoft Word works. If you do a markup document and you try to copy and paste because you only want to move part of it,
Yeah.
it automatically accepts the changes.
Right.
So you have to do the markup the old-fashioned way by underlining and crossing through, which is a real pain in the you-know-what.
Yeah, really.
Because there's a lot of minor stuff that we still need to finish up and finalize and take a look at specific language to make sure that we are in agreement.
Yeah.
Sound like a plan?
Mhm.
Any other issues that we've missed or neglected? I thought of one, and that is that the council was interested in knowing on the 10-year rule for having a charter committee, whether we could also just give them the option of going right to a charter review commission or a charter commission on that 10-year cycle if they really wanted to do something major and skip having a committee. I don't see any problem with that. That's probably what they would have chosen to do this year, I think.
But does that rush things through? Because the commission's already set up? So it gives them power to rush things through?
It would give the council the option of either going with a committee or setting up a charter commission. I mean, the one difficulty with the charter commission is it's an all or nothing proposition.
Yeah.
The whole charter goes to election. So yeah, you could set up a commission and they could come back and change the universe and put it out for a ballot and you're stuck with it.
Right.
Whereas the committee or the charter amendment process is a vote on each change that you make. So I think last time we had 10 questions on the ballot, 9 of them passed.
Okay.
I think everybody felt it was necessary to vote at least one of them down. So I think that had to do.
I think that we could put that language in, but I'd be concerned with it just going directly to commission without a review, for fear that there would be what you said. I mean, that there is that possibility out there that there could be a group that just changes it
Oh
completely.
yeah, I mean it would
Oh,
be
yeah.
it would be relatively easy, I think, to organize a coup to dramatically change the charter when nobody's paying attention and then have a vote on it.
Yeah, that would be, yeah.
I
Yeah,
think the commission would also be grateful for having the committee in the sense of what we're doing now, just getting things,
Mhm.
together, making them,
Yep.
just so folks are aware of what's going on, and then present it to the commission or the committee. I think it's it's a fair process, and then
Mhm.
people can determine whether they're going to want to run to be on that commission based on those items. And then some, right? They might bring up other things, but at least they have something to go with.
Yeah, I know in Portland's going through that process right now with the Charter Commission.
Mhm.
I think it was citizen initiated there,
Yeah.
and it all goes back to their structure of government. There's a group that would like to eliminate the city manager down there and go to a strong mayor system.
I know, but some of it looks like a pact, like a group, literally, like
Oh.
there is some focus on like, well, we're just gonna go for these 7 people because they believe in this vision for the city.
Yep.
And whether you agree with that vision or not, I find that very concerning. I'm more for let's get everybody's opinion because we all live here, right? Instead of one specific group saying, no, this is what we want.
Yeah, because I think what happens if you get a situation like that is they come up with something and then some other group has to organize and raise money and fight it and eventually
Yeah.
gets voted down.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That just recently happened in Austin, where a group wanted to get rid of the city manager's system down there, put together a charter commission, rewrote the charter, put it out for vote, and another group organized against it, and it failed by 80% voting no.
Wow.
So obviously that initial group that worked on the charter was not representative of where the community was,
Right.
Right.
and I generally think you're much better off if you try to come up with something that people are generally comfortable with.
Yeah.
Than try to put something through that's a dramatic change that invites opposition.
Hmm.
Okay, so our next meeting would be then on the 7th, I think I said.
June 7th.
June 7th. I will try to get some stuff out in advance of that meeting, both on the big issues and on some of the language of some of the smaller issues, so you can start looking at it. And I guess then we can go from there. Anything else that we've missed, need to add to the list, should consider? We ought to take one more run through of the public comment
Yep.
that was made, because there were a number of items brought up there. Maura Murphy in particular kind of brought stuff up that hadn't been on our list, new items. I'm not sure we can address all of them, but some of them were brought up there. And we ought
I
to at
think we
least,
should go through all of those again, yeah, and make sure that we've covered what everybody that took the time to comment, we've looked at it.
I have one last thing, and I had written in, and I think it's an old write-in that I had us next Wednesday, 26th at 5 o'clock. That's not happening.
yeah, no, that's not happening because we originally were planning to meet on Wednesdays, but Francis's schedule doesn't work on Wednesdays, so we went to Mondays.
Thanks, Francis.
And the 7th, we don't have a conflict with planning board?
Nope, I got it on the 15th.
Good,
I 14th, I mean, but yeah, next week, the following week, so good.
good. Okay. So
Can I
once,
pause 1 second? I was
Sure.
just looking at May 26th, and I have that schedule already made, so if we do want to meet that day, we can.
Aha.
I'm working from 7 to 1 a.m. that day. So 5 p.m. does work.
No, it doesn't. I had to change LATC from last week for a personal reason, so I could attend my son's senior track meet, and that got LATC now is the 26th.
Right? It's not on my shoulders anymore.
Nope,
okay,
no, I'll take this one.
All
well,
right.
let's go with the 7th. That'll give me some more time to start writing up all of the various languages and getting copies out to everybody.
Okay,
I will probably have finance committee on the 7th. I'm not sure, but because we're meeting on the 24th, then I think maybe 2 weeks later, but I can check on that.
yeah, it's colored green on my city calendar, finance committee
Okay.
for the 7th.
And that meeting starts at 5:30.
5:30. Mhm.
I hate to suggest it, but could we do it at 7?
Or even 6:30. They usually don't take very long.
Okay, 6:30.
I could do that.
I can do 6:30,
Good.
Which day are we talking?
May 7th.
Yeah.
June
okay.
7th.
June 7th.
Excuse me, June
Yeah.
7th.
June 7th. Yeah.
Great.
So
we're
6:30.
at 6:30.
6:30.
Oh, there was something else. I'm looking through my notes. I apologize. I wanted to mention this earlier. City councilor, a current sitting city councilor sitting on as a chair of a committee in the city or a board in the city. Not necessarily a committee, but I don't think that they're doing a bad job or anything, but I'll make the example of Mr. Clement sitting on, he's now the chair of the finance committee and he's a city councilor. I think that they should be on the committee, but I'm wondering how that works with being the chair. Also, I think about a city councilor wanted to become the school committee chair this year. And she's the representative for the school committee and is on the city school, right? And on the city council, and then wanted to be chair of the school committee. Is there any language around that? And should we be looking at that? Because I just find that a little bit concerning.
Yeah, there is no specific language on that. There is language that says if you're, say, for example, if you're on the planning board, you can run for council and not step down from the planning board. But if you're elected, you have to step down from the planning board. So there's, and some of that's because there's an incompatibility of office issue there.
Yeah.
Right.
But there's nothing that prohibits council members from serving as chairs of virtually anything that they're appointed to other than that.
Okay.
And council members, for example, serve on a whole bunch of intergovernmental agencies and other kinds of groups. And it is not unusual, even on ad hoc committees, for a council member to be assigned as chair.
Okay. I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, I think it'd be pretty much up to the rules of the individual committee. I would be shocked if the school committee ever voted for a council member to be chair. That would be a real.
It came pretty close this January. I'm sorry, but it did. It came really, really close. And
Okay.
Wow.
that's, yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing that would prohibit it. I don't know if you want to suggest something along those lines. We could certainly have
Let
a
me think
discussion.
about it a little bit. I mean, it's not necessarily like, I was just wondering, because I was just thinking of the two examples that happened this year. I have really no problem with a city councilor that is representing on a committee, you know what I mean, or the finance committee or the whatever it is like that, and that the members choose. But I do find it a little concerning that the representative for the city council would want to be, and is representing on the school committee, wants to be the chair of the school committee. Now they're holding three very big positions there. I'm a little concerned about that. So I can look at that further and probably get some comments and look a little closer at that.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see where you could be. It could potentially become an issue.
Yes.
Anything else? If you think of anything else, look back through stuff. And if you see anything else we've missed, let Dennis or I know, because I'm sure there have been odds and ends with all these discussions we've had. And as I said, I'll try to start getting some actual language back to people so you can react to the specifics.
Okay. Thank
Good.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
it is
Thank you very much.
6:30, and I told my wife we would be done at 6:30. So
Excellent.
Me
Well
too.
done. Well
Sounds
done.
good.
All right.
Bye.
we are
Bye.
adjourned. Good night.
Good night.